probably need to be able to give some talking points, because somebody will say, like a white friend said to me, that was hundreds of years ago, I'm good. So what do you say? What talking points can we give besides just maybe a verse, a scripture, or something like that, to just say, especially if they really want to know?
Karen, I think that's a great question, because I think that's where particularly a lot of those that are in the majority culture are like, what do we say here? We've talked about the parable of the Good Samaritan, that just because I'm not the one, that doesn't mean that I'm relieved of responsibility. But I think in the United States, it even goes a little bit deeper, because we recognize that because certain people defined by race were in power for so long, they created some of these systems that have worked better for them, quite frankly, than they have for other people. Just if you go back and look at the history of whether it's Jim Crow laws or practices like redlining and some of the long-term damage. There's a political commentator, and he's very conservative. Let me just add that. So this is not, just sort of a left-wing talking point. He says, the word systemic used to really bother me, because I thought it meant that the laws themselves were bad. And he said, we got that correct in the civil rights movement, and so why are we talking about systemic laws? Here's how he defined it, and I thought it was really good. His name is David French. He says, a system in which public policies, institutional practices, cultural representations, and things like movies and books and other norms work in various, often reinforcing ways to perpetuate racial group inequity. It identifies dimensions of our history and culture that have allowed privileges associated with the color of one's skin, whiteness, and disadvantage associated with color to endure and adapt over time. Structural racism is not something that a few people or institutions choose to practice. Instead, it's been a feature of the social, economic, and political systems in which we all exist.
Yeah, that's really good, and I think it's a great summary. I would, however, say that we also need to understand that the systemic racism is not just that the due process is not just happening. It has been an intentional thing, because even in the text, it talks about this idea. This matter arose because false brothers infiltrated our ranks to spy out the freedom. So it's also in a very intentional very thing that has happened over before the 13th Amendment, after the 13th Amendment, and what minorities and African Americans are saying, it's still happening today. So it's not just that it's happening and the system is not working for African Americans, but we're talking about a system that, when we talk about systematic racism, that is intentionally still trying to oppress. And I think that that's really what's important about these types of conversations, is being able to have these conversations where we can begin to talk and have real conversations where we can speak the truth in love, right? And in speaking the truth in love, there may be some things that may not sit right with us, but we have to stay in the fight, right? Because what you see is Paul willing to travel all the way to Jerusalem to stand before the powers that be, to be able to address and to advocate and to fight for and to give voice to a group that did not have voice in the church. And so throughout this time, ultimately, that's really what we want to do over these next 5 sessions,